You are listening to Draw 4 Podcast. Good tidings, and thanks for joining us. My name is Joseph Dunlap, executive producer of Draw 4 Podcast and featured writer for Manaleak.com.
I'm Brenda Smith. I'm a grinder.
I'm TJ Love. I'm a competitive player for Standard and Modern.
And we have a guest. Introduce yourself, sir.
Hi, this is Reuben Bresler, a.k.a. Mox Ruby. I guess I'm a community, loudspeaker. I'm a content creator. I am in a lot of the discussions on social media and stuff like that. And currently, I'm working as the media manager for Tales of Adventure out of Coopersburg, Pennsylvania.
You are part of a somewhat well-known podcast. I think it's got a small following of a few people. What's the name of that podcast?
Right. I'm also one of the three-headed monster of Magic Mics, which is myself, Evan Irwin, and Aaron Campbell. And that's live every week at 11 p.m. Eastern Time to midnight Eastern Time. And yeah, we try our best with that podcast. And we're also sort of a live TV show, so we try to get immediate reactions. So by the time, I don't know how fast the turnaround is for your podcast, but it's possible that by the time this comes out, this week's episode will have already been recorded, I guess.
Yes, I intend to be editing this tomorrow, which means it should be released at a time that's conducive for the UK Manaleak release on Thursday morning. So yes, this you will have already recorded yours. Cool,
I'm like time traveling. So this is the first time I'm actually talking about any of these topics, even though this is coming out publicly after I do the Magic Mics. But I wanted there's plenty to talk about. I could fill a bunch of hours all by myself in basically everything I do. So I wanted to be able to speak, and you were gracious enough to give me a platform.
Yes, I appreciate having you on. We had another of your ranks on Magic Mike's podcast on Draw 4 a few months ago when I had Erin on to talk about various topics.
Nice, yeah. She's, I think that the reason why Magic Mike's work so well is that the three of us are so different, even though that we're all content creators, and we're all sort of well known for the content that we create, but we all have our foibles and different things that we're passionate about. So, yeah, Erin's great.
With that, let's move on to our first segment, the Upkeep, which is our warm-up topic. There's a lot to talk about this week, but first, let's talk about Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad. Not only was it a great Pro Tour to watch, but a documentary was previewed that premiered on Monday. The documentary was entitled Enter the Battlefield by Sean Kornhauser and Nathan Holt. It follows several pro players in their journeys over the 2014 season. Reed Duke, Owen Turtenwald, Huey Jensen, Patrick Chapin, Shahar Shinhar, Melissa Del Toro, and Chris Pikula as he was trying to get back into the ballots to be on the Hall of Fame. What did you guys think of the documentary?
Loved it. It was great.
I'm still in the process of watching it. I've just got through the Oath Peach Garden segment, and I don't know, it's really interesting. I'm still kind of getting into it, but I'm really enjoying what Patrick Chapin's had to say about it, his journey through his Magic career.
Yeah, I watched it when they streamed it on Twitch on Monday, and I really enjoyed it. It was really awesome to see some of the behind the scenes on the group and how they come together and work together. It was really interesting.
There were definitely a lot more feels than I expected, and they did a good job weaving the narratives, especially really focusing on Patrick Chapin's goal of winning the World Championship, to where he even says winning the Pro Tour is just so he can qualify. And I remember watching that World Championship, and I remember that narrative being front and center.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very impressed with the whole thing. I think that Sean and Nate, who are the Walking the Plains, the brains behind Walking the Plains, and they put this project together. And Brian David Marshall and people like that have been trying to get there to be a Magic documentary for a decade, and it finally happened. And they couldn't have had two better people to put the project together. And everyone who's a piece of the story of Enter the Battlefield has their own unique storyline behind them. You've got, they went to Reed's neighborhood and went to his part-time job, and they went to Owen's apartment where he grew up in, and it was just super entertaining. And it's really great for anyone who's not super invested in the Magic, pro community, or even knows what Magic is. It's just a human story that everybody can appreciate.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see they talked a lot about how Shahar Shenhar spent his first 8 years in Jerusalem, and the first thing he really came to America with was well, not necessarily with, but when he got here in Sacramento, I believe, his first hobby was magic, and his whole family supported it, and they eventually just started to talk about how that they were very idealistic on their family bondings, and they said that no matter how much he played Magic, no matter how much he invested into the game, he always put his family before the game, but the game always meant just as much to him as well. And it was really nice to see how refreshing that was in terms of what this game really means to people and how it actually affects their families. Because they even talked, Shenhar's father actually, he said Magic has affected us all in one way or another, whether we play the game or not, but it has shown through Shahar's love for the game, and therefore it has actually made his family closer. And that's pretty amazing to me.
I liked when his brother said that they're there to absorb his happiness and then give their happiness to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the greatest quotes I'd heard in the documentary. I really like that one a lot. His family is just super supportive. If you have a game where 90%, 100% of the tournaments really aren't in the country in which you live, it can be difficult. But Shahar's whole family, all of his siblings and mom and dad, put a bunch of energy behind making sure that Shahar was able to be a part of it. And the whole Enter the Battlefield was really about family. They talked with Owen Turtenwald's mom and discussed, Owen's father passing and how Magic and the brothers that he'd been able to make through the Peach Garden Oath helped him through that process. It's just the feels were definitely there the whole time. It was well put together. The soundtrack was excellent. I would highly suggest it for everybody. And it's available on Netflix and YouTube. So, pretty wide reach to be able to get out something with our little hobby in it.
And I think that's what I appreciated most, because it was really made for the masses. I mean, we as a community sometimes can get really caught up in, our terms, I'm playing Esper Dragons, or I'm, hitting the Pro Tour. And there are terms and things that we use that our friends and family may not understand. Or speaking for myself as somebody who, tries to go to as many Grand Prix as I can, and I grind away, explaining to my mom why we're postponing Mother's Day a weekend because I want to go to GP New York. Being able to show her something like this really allows everybody to kind of understand, get an insight into our love for the game and our love for the community and the friendships and relationships we've made because of this great game.
So, general consensus, go watch it. It's great for Magic players. It's great for explaining to your friends what about the game drives you, why we're so passionate about it, because of the human aspect of it, the drive to better yourself.
Yeah, there's a couple other movies that are similar to this for other games. I saw a movie that was called I Want to Be the Guy, which was about a video game I'd never heard of, but I was thoroughly entertained for an hour and a half. This is that for Magic, and it's a huge deal that we finally have that we can say, oh, what's your hobby? It's Magic. What is that? Go watch this on Netflix. It's a big deal.
I liked the interwoven storylines of the different players, and especially the risk of doing a documentary about something as it's unfolding, not knowing who's going to win, and having certain players just not do well in a certain tournament where they want to be filming people doing well, but ultimately they end up with two of the players that they're covering facing each other for the big title, and so there's a lot on the line when you're making the documentary, but they also end up showing you that unlike Movie World, when you're rooting for someone, you know their story, there's someone else with their story, and the winner's ultimately decided by not necessarily who you're rooting for, who the protagonist was of the story. We like Shahar, we like Patrick Chapin. The winner ultimately was whoever the card said would be the winner. So let's move on to talking about the actual Pro Tour. We had what coverage called the most stacked Pro Tour top 8 ever.
That's a bit of an exaggeration. I think in modern times you can certainly argue for that, but I think that there's, as someone who's been playing since, I can think of some Pro Tours that had some more stacked top 8s than this, but certainly since Twitch coverage has been a thing, this is the most impressive one I've seen.
It was definitely refreshing to not see a mono red deck in the top 8, or anywhere for that matter.
How dare you?
So our top 8 was Steve Reuben, Andrea Mengucci, Shota Yasuoka, Seth Manfield, Luis Salvato, some guy named Luis Scott Vargas, Brad Nelson, and John Finkel. And Brad Nelson and LSV actually faced each other at the beginning of day 2 because they finished day 1 undefeated. They faced each other in the draft portion where LSV actually took a huge risk with a real interesting blue-red deck. It had 3, what is that card?
Fevered Visions?
It
Fevered
had
Visions.
3 Fevered Visions. It was just the coolest thing. Steve Reuben won the whole thing with green-white tokens, which actually was way too fast for anyone to deal with. You had Andrea Mengucci in the finals with Bant. That deck is pretty aggressive. I like it. I play it. It's also nice and grindy, but, I mean, when you sacrifice aggression for grind, then you can't really keep up with the sheer speed of green-white tokens. What did you guys think about that final?
Oh, it was definitely something to watch. Like, in my opinion, the breakout card that I was definitely not expecting to be in the Pro Tour and then ended up being in pretty much any white deck sideboard was Tragic Arrogance. And that card literally left so much of an impact on both of those games because, I mean, with Avacyn, especially with the top 8, only those 2 decks, the Bat Company deck and the Green White Tokens deck being the only ones playing Avacyn in the top 8, it was definitely something to see, so much as the fact that Tragic Arrogance that pretty much negates Avacyn's usability and just kind of, because like it's not like you can flash Avacyn in response and stop it because it's a sacrifice effect. It's a really, really cool card. But overall, just it was funny because in the finals match between Andre Mengucci and Steve Rubin, they had both sided in copies of Tragic Arrogance against each other. But what was really crazy was only one of them could go Secure the Waste for 6 at the end of turn. So I think, and overall, that was probably the thing that pushed the last bit of damage through.
Well, you mean Secure the Waste with a Nissa minus and a Gideon emblem was good?
Oh, yeah.
Weird how that's good.
Yeah, seems alright.
Man, that just got nasty. I was watching, just hoping for a game 5 or something, but it just got nasty quick. It was so fast, and I wonder whether that's just like we've said with the human decks that also did well, whether this is going to be more of a metagame thing or whether this is going to start to dominate the idea of a Nissa Gideon tokens deck.
And not to like brag anymore on Tragic Arrogance, but did anyone remember seeing the play where Steve Rubin played a Tragic Arrogance, and when he was deciding on the things he should keep, he picked his own Hangerback Walker as a creature and then a Thopter token that was already emblemed by Gideon as an artifact. So he got to keep 2 creatures, and that really pushed through like so much extra damage.
Card types matter.
Yeah.
So the top 8 decks below the top 2 were 2 Esper control decks, 1 Esper Dragons, 1 just Super Friends, which we've talked about at length on Draw 4, the difference between the 2. Then there was an interesting red-white goggles deck. It was Madness Burn / Super Friends / Eldrazi Tribal and Brenda's favorite card, Goblin Dark Dwellers.
I do love that thing.
And that was real interesting to see in the top 8. And then there was LSV's Black-Green Aristocrats, which, when you look at it, you see it's just a less broken version of Rally, and the breakout card is Cryptolith Right, so it lets him tap all his creatures the moment they hit the battlefield and get some mana.
Yeah, it was pretty insane when he was turn 1 land, turn 2 Elvish Visionary, into turn 3 Cryptolith Right, into another Elvish Visionary. I was like, ugh, he's drawing cards. Like, if I was playing a company deck, not knowing that deck had company at first, but like if I were to play that game 1, not knowing what I was jumping into, and I saw Cryptolith Right, I would immediately assume that he's playing some kind of ramp strategy to play like Ulvenwald Hydra or Ulamog, like the original Cryptolith Right decks were. But then once he saw Nantuko Husk, I think he kind of got the idea. I think it was the match between LSV and Shota Yasuoka, Shota being on the Esper Dragons list, and I think the only thing that really put Shota over the top was the fact that he literally had spot removal like every single time LSV wanted to do something, and it literally, like, he played so many copies of Languish too, but just I think the shiner in that deck was Ultimate Price for sure, because it just how effective it was against Nantuko Husk. And granted that the cards Ultimate Price has always been an all-star in pretty much anything, but it was not as good in the previous format because of the fact that most decks were 3 and 4 colored and played too many multicolored creatures. But now that most decks have kind of settled down to the the basic 1 to 2 color decks with the occasional 3 if they want to stress their mana base. I think Ultimate Price got a lot better, and as good as Nantuko Husk was and still is, it definitely took a hit when Ultimate Price started seeing more play.
Now, the interesting thing with Cryptolith Right must have been when they were testing, they're like, well, I mean, these little 1/1s, we don't really want to tap them sideways early on in the game. We can later on in the game, but typically that's just Nantuko Husk doing it. So let's find another way to tap them sideways, and I thought that was really creative. So then we have the red-green goggles ramp. I did not expect that at all, but it's the idea of the Surge X burn spell, Fall of the Titans, that you just copy with goggles. And I liked that the past 2 weekends, it's been goggles getting your big horror to come out of the ice, but now it's all about burning your opponent out. So let's see what happens with goggles over the next few weeks. And then finally, a real interesting one, Seasons Past. Reuben, have you heard of Seasons Past?
Oh, I certainly have. That was our preview card on Magic Mike's. Yeah, we were pretty giddy in our little Google chat, the three of us, when we saw that the best Magic player of all time, John Finkel, and the rest of the team, which includes like half of the best 20 players of all time, had decided that our little dinky little card was going to be the draw engine, the card advantage engine of their control deck. I certainly didn't expect it. But that's why I'm a guy that talks about it, and they're the guys that actually win tournaments with it. You look at the rest of the deck, and it's a bunch of black removal spells and card draw. Read the Bones, supported by things like Ultimate Price and Languish and Dead Weight and things like that. Black clearly had the best removal, and usually when you build a control deck, you look for the best card advantage engine, so that when you're 1-for-1s like Dead Weight and Ultimate Price, you can draw more of them. And usually it's blue. Usually it's Sphinx's Revelation or Opportunity or something like that. This time it just so happens that Seasons Past is the best late-game card draw spell in the format, which I did not see coming. And so I thought that was a super innovative deck, especially considering the fact that the previous weekend at the Star City Games Invitational, 22 one-drop White Weenie was what won, and everyone was thinking, oh, you just need to be faster and go under people. And they're planning on playing a 6-drop that doesn't do anything when you cast it other than get stuff back from your graveyard. But yeah, leave it to Pantheon to come up with that. And the big card out of that, I think, is Nissa's Revelation is what it's called, which is 5 colorless and a green, search your library for 3 basics, and gain 7 life.
Nissa's Renewal.
That card is... I did not expect that card at all. That card was, if I expected maybe a 5% chance of seeing Seasons Past, I had less than 1 of seeing Nissa's Renewal. But the gaining 7 life and being able to get all those lands out of your deck and then return it and gain 7 more life and getting more lands out of your deck, that engine was unbelievably powerful.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I actually, in my pre-release experience with this new set, the promo I pulled was a Seasons Pass, and I ended up getting a second one out of a pack in there. So I ended up playing a green-blue kind of like tempo bounce thing, and my finisher was like 2 of the big 6/6 Delirium Trample Pigs. I can't remember their name off the top of my mind.
Dire Swine.
Dire Swine, that's it. But what was really crazy was we were playing. I was just playing so many limited games. I ended up winning that pre-release event. Because just with the sheer power of playing just so many like Just the Winds and playing a lot of value creatures that let me investigate, and at the top of my curve was 2 Seasons Past, and I would play it, and my opponent would be like, "What does that do?" I'm like, "I'm basically going to replay the entire game over again." It was,
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a really fun card. I gotta say.
Constructed when you can play Dark Petition, to be able to play even more copies, which, by the way, Dark Petition was in another top 8 deck. I think it was in the Esper Control deck. That card saw a real uptick in value also. And the fact that I just love that the pros figured this out, that last week it was all White Weenie and Bad Company, and like, who gets on the board the quickest and get these turn 5 kills. And then you get to the Pro Tour, and people are playing Esper Dragons and Esper Control, and you have 8 archetypes in the top 8. It was just fantastic.
Yeah, especially since like this is one of the first Pro Tours I've seen personally that didn't have a lot of matching decks in the top 8, and they all had like their own significant like differences. And one of the like for especially like the only I think the closest thing I saw were the 2 Esper lists, but one was dragons, one was straight pure control, and it was like super friends and just removal, and its main win con was like Sorin, I believe, and that was like the kind of Esper control list I began to fall in love with back in the Ravnica Theros standard, with Elspeth being your win con.
And if you scroll down through the other successful standard decks, it wasn't just the top 8. This wasn't a coincidence that 8 different decks made top 8. You go down through the rest of the really well-performing decks, and you see, well, first of all, humans of various types. Michael Major is playing blue-white humans. There was an 8 and 2, I think, that was playing mono-white humans. If you look at the 8 and 2 lists, and you look at the 24th place Jeskai control that Rob Paisano played, which had nagging thoughts as a thing to regain some value, and Avacyn's judgment and stuff like that, and a descent upon the sinful. There's a whole bunch of innovation that the players on the Pro Tour figured out that people just hadn't figured out beforehand. So I'm really excited to see how the format evolves from here, because it's wide open still.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For me, I'm mostly a limited player, simply because, as a fault of my own, I get bored easily, and limited's never the same match or game. So it's really exciting.
One of the decks that we actually have been brewing, straight Esper control list, it was more of like an Esper Dragons list, but one of the things about the old Esper Dragons list was the fact that it could play Crux of Fate and was able to wipe the board without touching your dragons. That was kind of like the big thing about it. But now that we've actually started to learn that we have to be able to preserve the dragon part of our deck, we've started to brew a little bit more with Tragic Arrogance being our board wipe. And frankly, it's been because you can save Ojutai and then wipe the rest of the board and leave them with something you probably don't care too much about. And I don't know, I've really, and I'm sorry, I've probably spent this whole podcast talking about Tragic Arrogance, but I can't get over how good that card really is.
Well, actually, the next thing I was going to do was go over what the best standard decks were in the Swiss, but I guess you guys have saved me the trouble. But I can say that they're just as far as the decks that went 8-2, 8-1 and 1, and 9 and 1 in standard. There were 15 unique archetypes if you count things like red-green ramp without goggles being different from red-green goggles with ramp, and so forth, like white-blue humans and mono-white humans being 2 different decks, and there being like 4 or 5 different Super Friends combinations, and different brews involving like red-white displacer and things like that. 15 unique archetypes that did well in the standard Swiss. So, yes, you guys have nailed it as far as saying, it's very diverse right now. Part of that might have to do with Power Creep, and that part of that might be intentional. They've got great people working for them at Wizards, playtesting all the time, daily. So hopefully this is the direction they're wanting to take things, and it's a lot of fun because, like Modern has been recently, it's the Wild West.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's move on to the next segment. This week's Manaleak article of the week. There's some guy named Joseph Dunlap who wrote an article called Top 5 Magic the Gathering Planes Every Magic Player Wants to See Again. Now, modesty would dictate I shouldn't choose my own article, but since it's Pro Tour season and a set just came out...
Right, but screw it. I'm the subject of my own album.
Yeah, and I'm going to drop some sick beats.
Love it.
Yeah. I did a poll on Facebook that was, what planes do you want to see? I polled the UK community because they are the primary demographic for Manaleak, as well as just the general Facebook group. And the winners of the poll were, in 5th, Alara, in 4th was Mirrodin/New Phyrexia, and 3rd was Dominaria, and 2nd was Lorwyn and Shadowmoor. I really like that particular block. And then the winner was Kamigawa. And the interesting thing there, as well as something that was brought up when I shared this on Reddit, the fact that Mark Rosewater had recently polled players a pretty similar question and had even asked, would you guys want to see Kamigawa again if we were able to kind of fix it a little bit and do that top-down design that we've been doing in the New World Order of design? And we came at the same conclusion that people, while they hate Kamigawa as a block, back from when it was first made, people love the flavor behind the world and want to see it more fleshed out.
As long as they don't reprint ninjutsu, I will definitely love to go back to Kamigawa.
Oh, come on. What's wrong with ninjutsu?
I don't know. Ink Eyes was pretty good, last I remember.
Sure. I mean, there are good cards.
Back in the old standard, it was turn 1 Ornithopter, turn 2 Swing, and then you would ninjutsu the Ornithopter with the, I can't remember his name, but he would bounce a
Ninja
lamp.
of the Deep Hours.
That's it.
Or Mistblade Shinobi. I mean, I think that ninjutsu is just one of the most flavorful abilities, though. The thing about Kamigawa is that this was before the quote-unquote New World Order or New Order, where they correctly were able to do top-down designs, and instead they sort of had things like Soul Shift and Splice into Arcane, which didn't play well with other sets. They were sort of really hampered by the fact that, Hisoka's Defiance, counter-target arcane spell, well, that's kind of the worst card ever in the grand scheme of things, but it was in a Pro Tour winning sideboard. It's super awkward when you have cards that only interact with each other. And so what you've seen more recently is things that, are flavorfully, they make sense with lots of other things. Lots of things that interact with clues, but don't necessarily depend on clues being a thing in order to be successful. For example, from the most recent set. So I think that if you give them a second crack at Kamigawa, and you do things like ninjutsu, which interacts with other blocks and other cards like Ornithopter and unblockable creatures, and you bring back Splice, but then you have Splice onto Instant, and Splice onto Sorcery, and Splice onto Artifact, and things like that. I think that it's a really cool design space that they can return to.
Plus, we have the new Legend rules. That's something but I think that's probably the big part that everyone hated about the first time around Kamigawa, was that everyone tried to play the same legendary things, and just it got nowhere really. But now
GTA Wars were a real problem.
GTA Wars were the big problem. But now with the new Legend rule, where each person can own a copy of whatever, I think it'll honestly open up the format a little bit more as well. Like, if you were to play the old Kamigawa block now with the rules that we have now, it may honestly not have been as bad. Granted that, ninjutsu and all those other mechanics could not throw out anything too crazy, if you know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
I think for me, it's kind of hard because in the grand scheme of things, I'm relatively new. Like Innistrad was kind of the set that I kind of dove headfirst into things. So Alara, Lorwyn, all this was Kamigawa. I only know in these, wacky drafts when I might see a pack or something. So it's kind of hard for me to really understand the worlds that were shaped. So I'm excited to go to any of them because it'll kind of almost be a first time for me. I know Alara was the multicolored thing really was interesting to draft, so that would be my pick. But that's kind of the extent of my knowledge on most of those.
Well, I will say this, and this probably should have been the title to my introduction for this podcast. If we ever did go back to Lorwyn, I would probably cry, because that was the block I actually started playing in. And my first in terms of my first competitive list, when I played Blue-Black Fairy Control, featuring Vendilion Click, Bitter Blossom, and Mistbind Click. And I probably should make my title Mistbind Click Extraordinaire.
I'm in the same boat you are in, TJ. Actually, a lot of feels there because my first FNM was a Morning Tide pre-release draft. And I played Little Goblins Brew with Boggart Shenanigans that when Alara came out, topped out with Flame Blast Dragon.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun until my wife said I wasn't allowed to play that anymore. And we made her a sweet little Merfolk tribal deck that would middle out the opponent or win through Island Walk. I really liked that they focused on the tribal aspect with that particular block, and that tribal has always sort of been a thing, but that really was, like, you had kinship and you had tribal in there, in the actual mechanics.
Yeah, I love the idea that, like, Mistbind Click, back then in that whole block, it was all about tribal, and when you were about done losing life to Bitter Blossom, you could sack it because it was a fairy, and you could champion it with Mistbind Click as a fairy, and that it was just one of the cooler parts.
They've admitted that was a design mistake, by the way. that they should have had Bitter Blossom be a rogue enchantment instead of a fairy enchantment, so that it wasn't mono upside for the Bitter Blossom. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of Lorwyn Shadowmoor as well. I would love to go back to Lorwyn and see some more of that flavor, because I think that there's a lot more to that story as well. The characters don't really interact. It's a lot like the Shire. The the hobbits do their own thing, and they aren't really aware of anything else that's even happening. I'm a huge fan of Lorwyn Shadowmoor block also, because that is probably the PTQ season that I had some of my best success in, mostly because of folks like yourself who were playing fairies, and I was just playing Kithkin, and I would just destroy them. I must have top 8'd like 8 of the 10 PTQs I played in that season. The whole flavor behind Lorwyn, and Shadowmoor too, but I really like the sort of fanciful, happy, even the bad guys. You look at the black cards, and it's still like troublemaking fairies, and Noggin Whack is a card that's in Morning Tide. It's not super serious, So I think that would be my top 2 planes to return to would definitely be Kamigawa and Lorwyn.
Yeah, like you could even go back and look at the art on the basic lands in Lorwyn, and even the swamps were just like covered in color, like pink lilies, and like it was super just vibrant. I think that was probably one of my favorite art sets in terms of Magic. But like it just had such vibrant colors and everything too. But overall, the overall flavor of the set was just, I think it was spot on. And granted, like you said, championing Bitter Blossom was a little bit broken,
but people loved it.
Yeah, but people played it anyway, and that's the thing. You give something people want to play, and they'll play it.
Well, I guess we have a consensus on that. You guys agree with the results pretty much. There was also an honorable mention. If you want to read about the history of these planes, if there's a plane that you are not familiar with its history, or if you just want to relive the glory days of your favorite block that was in this list, go and check out the article at manaleak.com/mtguk/author/Joseph-Dunlap. If you really want to find my author page, that's where it is. And there you'll see I have written over 3,000 words talking about the history of all these different planes, including little blurbs about the honorable mention, such as some of the other planes, some of the less explored planes like Wrath, and a few others like Chandelar. So moving right along to the community topic, this is what has been on everyone's mind for the past few days. We talked earlier about the Pro Tour and the documentary Enter the Battlefield. These were awesome. There was diversity, our first Magic the Gathering documentary, and all of this was quickly overshadowed this week when Wizards of the Coast made an announcement about a change that would affect Platinum Pros and Hall of Famers. They thought what they were doing was good for the game because the money that they were taking away, those of you who live under a rock or maybe are kind of unfamiliar with a lot of the ins and outs of Magic the Gathering, what they announced was the pro players, those who reach platinum level after lots and lots of good showings over the year, and the Hall of Famers, they all get a lot of money, appearance fees for showing up at events, which is great because they are the face of the game. People watch and play because they want to see these pro players and aspire to be as good as they are. They cut their appearance fees by anywhere between 75 and 90%, depending on whether it was Platinum Pros or Hall of Famers. And they justified it by saying, well, it's because we're increasing the prize purse of the pro players. We're letting the players who win the tournaments get more money because they want people to aspire not to the pro players themselves, not to becoming Platinum, not to Hall of Fame, but just to winning a single event, and then you've made it. And there was a huge backlash. Let's talk about that. Reuben, I understand that you're quite passionate about this, to where I actually invited you on Draw 4 this week because you said you did not have enough time on your home podcast to talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the breakdown of it is kind of complicated, but basically, in summary, they were going to take the top 30 or so players in the game, and they were going to reduce their, what amounts to be wages, basically, to by 92%. They cut their appearance fees at Pro Tours from $3,000 down to $250. They said that they were going to take the appearance fees at World Magic Cup qualifiers from $500 down to $250, and also reduce, the fees that they could be given at another event that I'm not recalling off the top of my head, but mostly it was the Pro Tours reduction from $3,000 to $250. And some quick napkin math showed that it's about $11,000 per pro, Platinum Pro, which times 30 is maybe $250,000. I don't know how much total it was, but basically you took your most prestigious players and gave them a massive wage cut. And very quickly, the community, I think, realized that, without something to aim for, without the dream, quote unquote, what are we doing? Like, why is there a Pro Tour without paying the pros? And so a huge amount of community backlash that was pretty much unanimous. There were some devil's advocate arguments out there about the Pro Tour, the pros, the Platinum Pro benefits stuff, but for the most part, the Platinum Pro benefits being cut was unanimously panned by everyone from kitchen table players to the pros that it affected to the Hall of Famers, who most of the Hall of Famers were like, yeah, our Hall of Fame benefits probably should be cut. As you keep adding more and more Hall of Famers, you can't afford to just keep paying everyone to show up to every Pro Tour. And so that's a reasonable thing. Even the Hall of Famers were like, yeah, cut our benefits, but the pros that have been working so hard, their benefits shouldn't be cut. And the worst part of the announcement, of course, was, there were two really, really, really bad parts of the announcement. One has to do with the yearly schedule, and one has to do with the Pro Tour schedule. The yearly schedule basically is what they said was 3/4 of the way through the year, they took back and said, no, we're not going to pay you this money. It's going to be a different amount. And by different amount, I mean significantly less, of course. But that timing is really bad. You need to do that at the beginning of a season so that players can prepare and not drive lots and lots and lots of miles if they don't want to. And the other thing is that they announced it during the top 8 of a Pro Tour that we just discussed was one of the most exciting from a perspective of pros and deck building alike. And so you took away all of this positive energy that you were going to get from being a professional from the Pro Tour, and all of the attention away from Enter the Battlefield, which premiered on Monday, and you instead replace it with this vitriol from the community. It was really just atrocious timing, and that was the worst part of it for me.
I very much agree with you on that. The overshadowing, the bad timing. If you look at the Reddit front page, it should be excitement about the thing that usually the community's whining about, which is the lack of diversity in top 8s. And all of a sudden, we should be talking about what you said, the amazing lineup in the top 8 and the diversity in the top, 20 to 30 standard decks being so diverse, and the idea of our first documentary about Magic. And instead, the entire front page of Reddit is post after post after post about it because of all the different things the pros are saying. In fact, there was an entire Reddit thread devoted to just linking all the reaction tweets from the pros. The premiere of Enter the Battlefield on Twitch that happened, it was a loop over, 12 hours or something, was overshadowed by an outpouring of outrage at Wizards over the changes. The chat was filled with viewers repeating over and over, pay the pros, pay the pros. And Twitter had a trending hashtag pay the pros. And it was the worst possible timing to follow up a Pro Tour with this.
Yeah, and I want to kind of quote Brian Kibler on this. He wrote an article not too long ago called Broken Promises, Thoughts on the Changes to the Pro Tour. And it was basically his insight on the situation itself. I really, really liked how he worded it. And, coming from Brian Kibler, he's been one of the biggest faces of the game since it started. He said, players have spent all year aiming for that critical threshold, sometimes flying to tournaments across the world on consecutive weekends in the quest for those precious 50 pro points. And now they have had the rug pulled out from under them just before the finish line. I do not simply think this is a bad policy change. I think this is incredibly disrespectful towards some of Magic's most dedicated ambassadors. I believe that is deceitful and downright immoral, especially given that it aimed at the players who have devoted their lives towards the game. And coming from me being one of the people who has devoted all their time and passion towards this, I think it's just disgusting.
Previous to when we're recording this earlier today, there was another step in the story here. But previous to that coming out, this was one of, if not the most trust-breaking thing that Wizards of the Coast has ever done to the Magic community. It's probably the most, but it's tough to tell because when you look at the Magic community, there's like 20 million people that play worldwide. I'm not even sure what percentage of that is aware that the Pro Tour exists. But of the people that are aware that the Pro Tour exists, this doesn't just affect the 30 people who are platinum next year. This affects anyone who was thinking about becoming or devoting more time to professional Magic. This is it affects people who are currently sort of waning away from the game. People like I saw some tweets from people like Andrei Strosky, who had top-aided 2 Pro Tours and is one of the wonderkins of the game. He said, I was thinking about leaving Magic already. This really helped my decision to make sure that I do that. And that's a really depressing thing to see. I'm reading these tweets thinking to myself, if the pros don't play in the Pro Tour, what's the point? What's the point of having a tour where the best in the world at that game aren't going to show up? It was a really depressing reality to have to face down. Now, I do want to say that I don't think that anyone who was making the announcements, like the people who were on camera, were not the people who made these decisions. I don't think. Like Helene Bourgeot, director of organized play, I can't imagine that this was her brainchild. I imagine it had to have come from higher up, possibly directly from Hasbro. But I don't work inside the building, so I don't know where this came from. I will say, and I'm going to echo Justin Cohen, the Rookie of the Year last year, who wrote a very well-written Facebook note on all of this. So today's announcement was that basically WotC was like, oops, sorry guys, we're going to put all that stuff back. And also, as part of the announcement on Sunday, when they announced the changes, they were like, we're cutting all these benefits for pros, but we're adding a bunch of prizes to the end of the year tournament, which was a big problem in the past, and I don't really want to get into it. But the announcement today was we're keeping all of the upped payments. Winner of Worlds is still going to get $70K, up from $40K or whatever it was, and also we're replacing all of the pro benefits. Great,
No.
But that's not good enough because as I said, you have broken the trust. There is something wrong inside the company. And as Justin says, and I wholeheartedly agree with it, somebody's got to go. There's got to be a head that rolls. Because this ruined trustworthiness. Like, I don't care that there's money back now. I don't trust Wizards anymore. That's me. I'm not even close to silver. So, I think that they need to prove something. They need to show something. They need to give us proof that, yes, we know this was a mistake and not just giving us lip service.
And I think that's my concern is I appreciate the step they made today with the follow-up announcement and, okay, you figured out that you made a mistake, but there was no, we see the error of our ways. We see what we did is wrong. It was more like, oops, we got our hand caught in the cookie jar. We better
Right. That
put the
is
cookie
exactly
back.
how it felt. You're right.
And they're not actually regretting the actions that they took. They're regretting that they got caught doing them.
Right.
And
This is the feeling that I have is if my wallet got pickpocketed and then, the person returned the wallet to me. Well, yeah, okay, but I need some
Still took the
contrition.
wallet.
Yeah. Something. So, and I think that the way that happens is Wizards needs to make a show of good faith of some kind because of the way that this all unraveled and the hashtag #PayThePros on Twitter, which, by the way, was trending in the United States, across the United States, not just in specific locations. It was one of the things you could click on the side of the page on Twitter. So it was big, and they need to do something like perhaps upping prize pools at Grand Prix would be like a step they could take. But I honestly think that's probably not a step that they would take, and I think that they need to show that we know this was a mistake, and therefore we have to hurt ourselves in some way. They need to prick their finger and show the community that they are worthy of our trust going forward.
Yeah, and the thing this might just be a little bit more on my topic. When they started talking about the elimination of modern Pro Tours, that's something I kind of wanted to touch up on. And they have talked about, we've kind of wanted to cut down on modern Pro Tours. Like, they said, not too long ago, if you want a modern Pro Tour, we have to cut down on so many different aspects of the game. And now that they said that they have literally one more Pro Tour, a modern Pro Tour I think it's scheduled in 2017, and after that, they just wanted to stop. And I think that there's still going to be a big outrage part of the community is in terms of that until because here's the thing. They print Modern Masters to lower the value of some cards that make Modern more accessible. And with making Modern more accessible, they want to make Modern a bigger format to open up people to the more expensive part of the game, and it makes, Wizards money. Now, what they're doing now is, we're going to print all these sets to open you up to a format that we're going to pretty much kill off. And that's another big thing that's really hit Modern players. It's like, well, what's the point of even playing Modern now? What's the point of even having a meta? What's the point of even playing the game?
I can understand that. I am not personally offended by the elimination of the Modern Pro Tour from a business standpoint because Wizards of the Coast makes a bunch of money from limited sets and Standard, and they don't make as much from Modern because for each set that comes out, only maybe 10 cards, maybe 5 cards impact the Modern metagame. And I think that eliminating the Pro Tour for a non-rotating format, which Modern is a reasonable step to take. However, I would like to see them step up support for Modern in a different arena if they do that. Perhaps Grand Prix, perhaps some other sort of support. And the good news is that even if Wizards is sort of backing out of the Modern Pro Tour, subtracting a lot of the interest that Modern would garner from the pros, one thing that's good is, A, it's probably still going to be a part of the World Championships and the World Magic Cup for those large-scale, wide-reach events. And also, the tertiary tournament series, like Star City Games Open Series, is in quarter 3 of this year, is running more Modern Opens than they are Standard Opens. And so they're not abandoning Modern. And if you look at, for example, the site that I work for, Tales of Adventure, we have a 10K Modern tournament as part of Eternal Weekend in June. And so I think that the secondary, the retailers, will pick up the slack if Wizards is choosing to take this path. I understand that it's not a Pro Tour, and that sucks, because that's a big ticket item. It's one of the 4 big events that Wizards runs, right. And it feels like that's a little bit of a slight for the format. However, if they replace it with some more, more Grand Prix, leave it as part of the Magic Cup and the World Championships, maybe introduce some other sort of carrot at the end of the stick for Modern. I don't know what that would be, but something. Then I would be happy with that. Certainly, there was some reaction. Negative reaction towards the elimination of the Modern Pro Tour, but for the most part, the pros actually did not mind that. But that decision is much more of a thing for people who are fans of the format as opposed to full-time grinders.
Yeah, and in terms of like you were saying, we're cutting it off. They were cutting it off, and just as from a personal standpoint, I understand the business, like you said, the business aspect of it. Because, like you said, they're not making any money. They have to pretty much change. Only certain cards are getting printed. But I think personally, I would honestly be completely okay with them just, Star City keep streaming them. And, just like the World Championships having Modern events. I understand that they want to keep it out of the Pro Tour. But I think it's just because a lot of people only play Modern. And now it's just less coverage that they get, and I understand that. But
that's how legacy players feel.
Yeah,
that's how vintage players. That's how vintage players felt before that. It's not that this is a purely business decision. Eternal Masters coming out later this year is the very first time that Wizards of the Coast will be directly making money off of the legacy format. Because they have nothing to do with secondary retail through Star City Games, Channel Fireball, TCG Player, what have you. Those are the companies that care about the Eternal formats. Right. They created Modern sort of as an in-between to be able to make some of the cards that they've printed relatively recently more relevant. You see, for example, before they were reprinted, the Shocklands were not terribly expensive because there just wasn't a home for them. And so they want to be able to maintain the value of the economy of Magic cards. And unless it 20 years old or from the last 2 years, without Modern, those cards sort of start to bottom out. And so I don't anticipate a full-fledged abandonment of the Modern format. I think that Modern will still be supported. Restricted list will still be well maintained. There will still be Grand Prix. There will still be lots of attention paid to it on some level from the Pro Tour, even if there isn't a Pro Tour. What I mean by that is that there will be World Magic Cup qualifiers, World Magic Cup events, etc. And so I would not worry too much about the death of Modern. I don't think that that's a thing that's going to happen.
I'd like to weigh in here on a lot of what you guys have been talking about. First thing is, let's just talk about Modern Pro Tours for a second. I wanted to give my opinion on that, and it's problematic not to have a Modern Pro Tour for the sole reason of you qualify for the Pro Tour by top 8ing a Grand Prix, and there are Modern Grand Prix, and so then you're playing Modern, you top 8 a Grand Prix, and now you've got an invitation to a standard Pro Tour, so that's a little bit problematic.
Well, that happens a lot, though.
It's just now there's just no way of qualifying for a Modern Pro Tour by doing Modern in a Grand Prix. So you kind of have to mentally disconnect yourself from that, which I don't think anyone really is going to, say, a year from now still be complaining about. But there's also problems with having a Modern Pro Tour, and that's the issue where, I mean, just with the recent bans, and we had Sapphire and Olive pointing out, well, this is because the ban of Splendor Twin is because you wanted a Modern Pro Tour. It's because Wizards wants to sell cards, as you pointed out, Reuben. So you can't really sell cards in Modern with sets that haven't just come out. It's hard to sell new sets through Modern because, as you said, only about 10 cards make it into Modern. So then they kind of give a rotation by taking out some of the dominant cards of the format. So it's hard to really... I want to start off by saying something that's a little bit misleading, which is it's hard to please the Magic community when you want to have a Modern Pro Tour, so you ban Splendor Twin, but now you don't have a Modern Pro Tour, so you don't have to keep banning cards, and people don't like that. But that's not entirely true. What's true is Wizards does not know what its players like and want. They don't understand what's good for us. They don't understand that we want a venue to play our Eternal formats without the fear of a deck being so good that they're going to ban a card. We want something to work towards in the Eternal formats. We want support for the Eternal formats. What we don't want is for them to give Modern a Pro Tour and then constantly mess with the Modern format by banning dominant cards and then taking away the Pro Tour taking it away from us afterward. That's not what we want. But then it all ties back to the announcement they made this weekend, and then recanted with their hand in the cookie jar, and like a toddler saying, "Oh, I was just joking. You know, I've got 2 of them, so I understand." It goes back to that. They didn't understand what was good for the pros. They didn't understand what it was that we as players aspire to. And I also saw the best devil's advocate argument in this whole conversation being that what the dream is in Magic is to win a tournament. And I think that Wizards thinks that. I think Wizards think that all we want is to win a tournament, when really what we want is to be a consistently good player. And that's what Platinum status was supposed to be. It was supposed to be you're consistent enough, even if you're not constantly, quote, winning. Getting the top 8 out of thousands of people sometimes is a really lofty goal. And being Platinum and getting paid these appearance fees was part of that. And for Wizards to say, well, we're going to reduce the appearance fees, but hey, look, we're going to increase the prize purse, just shows they don't quite understand that. They don't quite understand why someone would want Platinum over winning a tournament. Either that or they do, but they don't want that to be the goal because it costs them too much money. They want it to be about winning the prize purse, but that's not what the Magic community is about. Platinum Pro status and the Hall of Fame is about the community itself and rooting for people and trying to aspire to this greatness, not just once, but multiple times.
Yeah, like Reuben was saying earlier, the thing is about this entire situation is, like he said earlier, this was obviously most likely some kind of higher up, but the thing is, like, they've destroyed the trust of the community itself. But what the worst part about it is, this whoever higher up or whoever did this, they knew what they were doing. Like, this was no mistake, and that's probably the biggest reason in terms of why people are getting a little frustrated. It's probably the biggest reason why they're getting more frustrated about this, is the fact that they can obviously see, like, this is not a lot of decisions did come from a business standpoint, but this did come from someone who has a bigger understanding of the game and a bigger understanding of what's going on, and they took advantage of that and destroyed the trust of the people who were pushing so hard to be was no longer at the time worth achieving.
Now, I would love to discuss this for yet another hour, so I understand, Reuben, why it was that...
I could go on for 5 hours.
Yeah.
I got things about this that we haven't even touched on yet.
Oh, yes. I mean, maybe we could do it again next week. Maybe we'll do that.
I'm gonna when I have some time later tonight, when I'm sitting in my hotel room, and I have some time to actually put words to paper. You know, I have a tendency to sort of go on and on and on because I don't have the time to make it a shortened thought, right? I didn't have the time to write a short letter or whatever the saying is. So when I have some more time to put my thoughts together and I can actually narrow it down to maybe a 20-minute soliloquy, I'll do that, and that'll be on Magic Mics.
Let's move on to the community question, because I think this is a great time for that, not just because we're going long, but also because it seems like this is where the conversation is headed. So we've had the devil's advocate argument that this only affects a few dozen people. And TJ astutely pointed out perhaps the person making this decision knew exactly what they were doing. I would wonder whether their assumption was that nobody would really care what happens with a few dozen people. But this all comes on the heel of wanting to make a documentary and preview a documentary the very next day about pro players, about their passion for the game. I mean, even the part where Owen Turtenwald's sister says, well, I'm concerned about his future, his financial future. I'm not sure what's going to happen there. And then the day before the documentary comes out, they basically say, well, we're going to screw over his financial future by reducing his stability. So all of that comes down to a single question. And I think this answer is going to be different for everyone. As Reuben said, there are people who've never even heard of the Pro Tour, or don't care about it, or don't even watch it, or don't know who these names are, but there's a lot of us who are hashtagging and trending #paythepros. So the question is, how important is it that Magic the Gathering pro players, the faces of the game we play, are fairly compensated for participating in high-level tournaments? How important is it that there's a few dozen people getting paid for showing up?
So, you know, as a grinder, it's something that, you know, that's kind of your goal. Like, I want to not only be the best, you know, I want to be able to make an impact in the community and be able to reach out to others and draw more people into the game because I love the game. So if we're looking for ambassadors for the community, we need to make sure they're compensated. I am lucky enough that I love my job and I can fund my own, you know, transports to these Grand Prix and be able to play in all these tournaments. But there are a lot of people, especially younger people, who are very excited about the game and they can't. And not having this safety net, this way for them to be able to spend hours playing and grinding and learning and developing does a disservice to the entire community.
Well, I think it is very important for the most part. Like we've already previously stated, the whole point of even having a Pro Tour is to raise, you know, the hype and the coverage of the game that people, you know, come to play because they love it so much. And I mean, I've been playing this game for, I can't even tell you how long, since Lauren Block, and that's a long time. I can't even tell you how long ago that was. And every year I watch Pro Tour, every year I watch these pro players get really good. And the worst part about it is seeing the faces of the game that I've grown to watch get really good and, you know, compete in these events and become world champions and earn their titles. It's kind of depressing for me to see that these people that I've been looking up to for the past, like, I don't know how long now, are getting screwed. And as much as it's, you know, like, I would hate to not see, like, Owen Turtenwald, for example, like, if he were to get paid all this money and then suddenly go, oh, you're only making $250 now if you're showing up. And I understand this is the very end of the season, but, you know, sucks to be you. I mean, that's just, I don't know. It's just one of those things that, like, would really not necessarily get under my gears, but overall, I think it's extremely, extremely important that the people that look up to the higher-ups of this game get compensated enough for them to keep themselves financially stable to keep playing this game, and for people that are looking up to these said people able to keep watching and further getting involved with the game.
I think that there are a lot of things at play in this issue, and many of them have bubbled up as a response to this particular weekend. But these have all sort of been background issues that Magic players and Magic professionals have thought for a long time. Is the Pro Tour a thing that Hasbro, who owns Wizards of the Coast, something that they're interested in? It's a question that's been on the edges of conversations for a long time. Pro does not stand for professional in the Pro Tour. It actually stands for promotional originally. And so as a promotional tool, is the Pro Tour worth the money that they are spending on it? In my opinion, yes, it is. But of course, I'm shaded by my place within the Magic community. I know a lot of these people, and so much of my exposure to watching Magic and learning about the best way to play Magic comes from the Pro Tour. But I'm not the target audience, right? They've already got me. They're not trying to advertise to me. They're trying to get people who've quit the game or new people from other games. And so, is the Pro Tour a tool earning Hasbro money? I still think the answer is yes. I have friends who are not attached in any way to the Pro Tour who've contacted me in recent days and said, I play casually with my wife or my friends, maybe once, twice, 3 times a month, or I got friends whose kids play Magic and they go down to the comic book shop. I'm not attached to it directly, but they can still see the importance of fairly paying the people who are the best in the world at something. I'm a big fan of competence. That's the most attractive quality. If somebody's good at something, that's what I care about. If you're good at woodworking, if you're good at speaking, if you're good at whatever it is you're good at, that's what I care about. And, if you're good at basketball, you've got lots of different leagues that you can go to. If you're good at hockey, you've got lots of different leagues that you can go to. With Magic, it's weird because Magic Pros, the company owns the manufacturing license. It's like if the NBA owned the rights to every basketball. So the Wizards of the Coast has total control over fair compensation, notwithstanding things like Star City Games, etc. But basically, they have total control over what they think they can pay. And I think that because of that total control, it's incredibly important that the best in the world are fairly compensated for their skills and for devoting their time to this game that Wizards of the Coast makes. And the one issue that everyone agrees on is, 9 months into a 12-month season, you have to honor those promises. That is 100%. There's nothing you can do there. But beyond that, Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro and whoever makes those decisions has to take an honest look at themselves and say, is the Pro Tour worth it? And personally, I hope they say yes, because I think it is. But that's where this whole conversation is leading, is does Wizards of the Coast make enough money from the promotional tour of Magic the Gathering?
Well, not only did Brenda put my point better than I ever could, which is that they're ambassadors of the game, but Reuben also stole my analogy. Curse you, Reuben!
I'm terribly sorry. I'm really good with words, so,
Yes.
I'm just for stealing yours.
I was going to say, picture if you will. Let's say we'll say the NBA. I was going to say FIFA or something like that. You use the NBA, so I'll use that.
Sure.
Picture if you will that the NBA has the sole right to selling basketballs, but in order to play basketball, you have to buy many, many of them. And you watch the professional NBA players play, and watching them makes you want to play, which it does. But then every time you buy one of the dozens of basketballs you have to buy in order to play a single game, that money goes to the NBA. Now imagine not paying the members of the NBA. That was the analogy I was going to use.
It's not a perfect analogy, but it certainly makes sense, right? I think that if you own the outlet, if you control the spigot, right? If you control the faucet, and you could turn off the faucet. If you turned off the faucet, there wouldn't be Magic cards. There aren't other people that make, other than the Chinese counterfeiters, but that's not part of the discussion. If you control the release of your product, and you have a tour where the best players in the world play that game, how do you not use that to your full advantage? And more importantly, how do you step back and how do you take advantage of the trust that you had garnered by reneging on those promises that you had made? Something very similar happened with Amaya Gaming and the players on Poker Stars recently, where the players who were trying to earn bronze and platinum and gold status, very similar to Magic, 8-10 months into their year, Amaya basically said, yeah, we're not going to honor those. And there was a backlash very similar to this. And so, all you need to do is go look up some of the backlash for that, for a company that's significantly bigger than Wizards of the Coast, to see how badly that can go awry. So I think that Wizards has bigger problems than this. Is a good start. Saying like our bad is a good start, but it's not the end.
Yes, the damage has been done. So those of you who are listening, go and find us on Manaleak.com/MTGUK. You can find this episode if this isn't how you actually found it, if you're on iTunes or anywhere like that. Then go answer our question, which is how important is it that Magic the Gathering pays the face of their game when they appear at high-level tournaments to play their game? We very much want to hear your thoughts on it, as we obviously are extremely passionate about in this extra special long episode of Draw 4 Podcast. So as we approach the end, we get to say our farewells. Reuben, if you want to start it off, you can tell us where we can find you and talk to you about Magic.
Sounds great. MOXREUBY is where you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. You can friend me on Facebook. I typically just accept everybody on Facebook and then figure it out later. If you want to see my opinions on things, please visit Tales of Adventure. That's facebook.com/Tales of Adventure, or toacomics.com for the latest on what we're doing there. Not a whole lot of the projects are complete yet, but we are looking at expansion. And we're going to have some fun things coming up as the summer and the year progresses, leading up primarily to Eternal Extravaganza 4, which is going to be June 18th and 19th in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So we hope you guys come out for that. And yeah, I'm open for public discussion pretty much everywhere. And also another place that you might be able to see me do some public discussion is Magic Mics, which airs Wednesdays at 11 p.m. Twitch.tv/Magic Mics. MAGICMICS.
So like I said, my name is TJ Love. You can always contact me at my email, tj.love2@gmail.com. You can find me on Snapchat at TigerJoe267, or you can just find me on Facebook at TJ Love. I mean, I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. I usually respond to in minutes. I'm always open for discussion. And granted, my way of words is not as fluent as these fine people here, but I'm always available to talk about Magic. It's like one of my biggest passions, and I'm always willing to give advice. Like I said, I'm very fluent in Standard and Modern. But yeah, feel free to hit me up if you want to talk, and I'm very much available.
And I'm Brenda. You can find me everywhere online at Brenda is Bored, both Twitch, Twitter, and even on Facebook. I also enjoy talking about Magic. You can find me at quite a few Grand Prix. Feel free to come say hi, either online or in person, and let's chat. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Joseph Dunlap, executive producer of Draw 4 Podcast and featured writer for Manaleak.com. Reuben, thanks so much for phoning in as you drive
Thank you guys.
Poker coverage.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys letting me on the show and taking away your airtime to be able to spout some knowledge.
Well, I'm glad we were able to give you another platform where we can talk about these big issues. This has been Draw 4 Podcast. Until next time, we wish you good fortune, and may you draw well.